It was an ordinary day in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the sun shone brightly over neatly manicured lawns and the soft rustling of leaves filled the air. For most residents, it was a peaceful afternoon. But for one veteran, the day was about to take an unexpected turn. Veteran Sergeant Thomas, a man of few words but a wealth of experience, walked slowly down his driveway, the familiar weight of his uniform a constant reminder of his service to his country. His service dog, Max, a highly trained German shepherd, trotted faithfully beside him, their bond unspoken but deep. Max had been by his side for years, providing not just physical support, but emotional stability after the trauma Thomas had endured during his time in service. The dog had been his constant companion, offering a sense of safety and comfort that few could understand. As they reached the edge of the lawn, Thomas noticed a woman approaching him from the sidewalk. She was walking briskly, her face set in a stern expression. At first he thought nothing of it, but as she got closer, he saw the unmistakable look of determination in her eyes. She stopped a few feet away from him, standing tall with her hands on her hips. "Excuse me," she began, her voice sharp. "You need to remove that dog from this property immediately." Thomas blinked, surprised by her sudden and aggressive approach. Max, sensing the tension in the air, stood protectively by his side, his ears alert but his body still. Thomas had dealt with his share of confrontations during his time in the military, but nothing prepared him for the hostility he felt in the air now. "I'm sorry, Mom," Thomas replied calmly, his voice steady despite the growing unease in his chest. "Max is a service dog. He's here to assist me with my condition." The woman scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "I don't care what kind of dog he is. You're disturbing the peace of this neighborhood. It's a rule in the HOA that no pets are allowed unless they're registered. That dog is not registered, and frankly, I don't want him here." The audacity of the woman's words caught Thomas off guard. He had been living here for years, and never had he faced any issues with his service dog. In fact, he had always been careful to ensure Max's presence was well within the law, with all proper documentation filed with the HOA. But the woman's anger was palpable, her posture confrontational, and the sense of entitlement she exhibited made it clear she wasn't willing to listen to reason. "I've been living here for quite some time, and I've never had a complaint before," Thomas said, trying to remain calm. "Max is a service dog, not just any pet. He's here for my medical condition. I can provide the necessary paperwork if you need it." The woman didn't seem to care about the explanation. Instead, her finger shot out, pointing directly at Max. "I don't care what kind of dog he is. He's not welcome here. I've had enough of your excuses." At that moment, Max's body stiffened. His trained instincts kicked in, and he stepped slightly in front of Thomas, his eyes never leaving the woman. He didn't bark, he didn't growl, but the subtle shift in his posture was enough to send a clear message: "Don't get any closer." Thomas noticed the woman falter as she took a step back, perhaps for the first time realizing the presence of the dog she had been so quick to dismiss. For a moment, she hesitated, looking between Thomas and Max. The veteran could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut through. It was the first time in a long while that he'd had to confront someone in such a direct and hostile manner. The woman's words, though harsh and unfair, were just the beginning of what would become a heated conflict that neither party had anticipated. The woman, undeterred, raised her voice once again. "I'm calling the HOA right now. This dog has no business being here, and neither do you. I'll make sure you're both gone from this neighborhood by tomorrow." Thomas stood tall, his face impassive as he looked at the woman. His heart pounded in his chest, but his military training had taught him to keep his emotions in check, especially in moments of conflict. He knew better than anyone that engaging with anger would get them nowhere. But as he glanced down at Max, the bond between them was undeniable. The dog was calm, but ready to act if needed, a silent protector at his side. "I'm not going anywhere," Thomas said softly, but with an unwavering determination. "And neither is Max." The woman opened her mouth to argue further, but before she could, the unexpected happened. Max, ever vigilant, took a slow step forward, his eyes locked onto the woman's. In that one simple movement, the tension in the air shifted. For the first time, the woman's expression faltered. She stopped pointing and took a hesitant step back. Thomas could sense the change, and though the confrontation was far from over, he knew one thing for certain. This battle was far from ordinary. It wasn't just about a dog. It was about respect, boundaries, and a man's right to live in peace with his service animal. Little did anyone know, this moment would mark the beginning of a conflict that would end in an unexpected way, one that would forever change how people viewed the bond between a veteran and his dog. The standoff between the veteran and the angry HOA member seemed to reach a boiling point, the air thick with tension. The woman's finger was still pointed at Max, the loyal service dog, as if she could intimidate him into submission. But Max, the German shepherd, remained completely still beside his owner, his eyes fixed on the woman, ever watchful, never flinching. The veteran, Sergeant Thomas, stood his ground, his face calm yet resolute, but inside, his heart was racing. He could feel the growing pressure, the weight of the situation mounting with each passing second. The woman, her temper flaring, continued to shout at Thomas, "I don't care about your paperwork. This is a neighborhood, not a place for you to bring in your service dog to disrupt everyone's peace. You're breaking the rules, and I won't let this go." Her voice cracked with frustration, but Thomas didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His silence was the calm in the storm, and in that moment, it was clear that he wasn't the one who was losing control. Max, however, was the silent protector in this situation. He had been trained to detect and assess threats, to remain poised and composed, no matter the situation. The woman's aggressive demeanor had not gone unnoticed by him, and as he stood there, he could sense the underlying hostility in her stance, her raised voice, and the sharp finger she kept pointing at his handler. But there was something else in the air too, a feeling that this wasn't just about Max's presence, but about a deeper, more personal conflict between a soldier and someone who seemed determined to push him to his breaking point. Then, something remarkable happened. As the woman advanced toward him, continuing her tirade, Max took a subtle step forward. His body remained perfectly still, his posture unwavering, yet his movements were deliberate. In one smooth motion, he shifted his weight and let out a low, rumbling growl, one that was barely audible, but enough to send a chill through the woman's spine. It was not an aggressive growl, but a warning, a subtle signal that Max was not to be underestimated. The woman stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes widening in surprise. She hadn't expected the dog to react, let alone with such a controlled, calculated response. In all her attempts to overpower Thomas and dismiss the dog, she had overlooked one crucial detail. Max was not a normal dog. He was a service dog, specifically trained to protect and serve his handler. Max had been through countless situations, many far more dangerous than a confrontation with an angry neighbor. He knew when to remain calm and when to act. Seeing the woman falter, Thomas felt a surge of pride for his companion. But he remained composed, not wanting to escalate the situation further. "Max, sit," he commanded softly, and in an instant Max obeyed, sitting calmly beside his handler. His gaze, however, never left the woman, his alertness undiminished. The woman, now visibly shaken, took a cautious step back. She hadn't expected a response from the dog, let alone one that was so controlled and precise. Her earlier bravado was gone, replaced by hesitation. She stood there, unsure of what to do next, her hands falling to her sides. The situation had taken an unexpected turn, and for the first time, she seemed to realize that she wasn't in control anymore. Max, despite his intimidating presence, remained perfectly still, his eyes locked on the woman. He was waiting, not for her to make a move, but for the moment when she would back down. And slowly, it began to happen. The woman's angry words faltered as she looked from Thomas to Max, her mind processing the unexpected turn of events. She had expected the dog to be an easy target for her anger, but instead, she had encountered something far more powerful than she had anticipated. Discipline, loyalty, and the calm confidence of a trained companion who would never waver in the face of adversity. For a long moment, there was silence. The woman's body language had shifted entirely. Her shoulders were no longer tense, her posture less aggressive. She had, for the first time, acknowledged that Max was not just a dog, but a force to be reckoned with. Finally, she opened her mouth, but her words were not as forceful as before. I didn't mean to. I just thought. You can't have dogs like that here. Thomas took a deep breath, his voice calm but firm. Max is my service dog. He's trained to help me, and he has every right to be here as much as anyone else does. I'm not asking for special treatment, just respect. The woman looked down, unable to meet his gaze. It was clear she was beginning to understand that this wasn't just a simple argument over rules. It was about something far more significant. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a lifeline, a constant companion who provided something she could never understand: peace. As the tension in the air began to dissipate, the woman's posture softened. She still didn't fully understand the bond between Thomas and Max, but she could no longer deny its existence. Max, sensing the change, stood up from his sitting position, his body language relaxed but alert. He hadn't needed to do anything more. His simple, controlled response had spoken volumes. The message had been clear. When it came to protecting his handler, Max was unwavering. The woman turned and walked away, her steps slower, her anger subdued. Thomas watched her retreat, his gaze lingering on Max. The dog had done his job, and had done it well. But the moment was far from over. Though the confrontation was winding down, there was a deeper sense of satisfaction in the air, not from winning the argument, but from the realization that respect had been earned, not through words, but through actions. As the veteran stood there, his dog by his side, he couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of pride. The bond between a man and his service dog was something that went beyond simple companionship. It was a bond forged in loyalty, understanding, and the unspoken promise of protection. And in that moment, both Thomas and Max knew they had stood together, as they always would, in the face of adversity. The silence that followed the confrontation was deafening, but it wasn't just an absence of sound. It was the weight of realization, of understanding. The woman had walked away, her earlier fury dissolved into a quiet, uncertain hesitation. She had underestimated the power of the bond between a veteran and his service dog, and she had learned an invaluable lesson about loyalty and respect that day. But for Sergeant Thomas and Max, the moment was far from over. This was not just about a disagreement with a neighbor. It was about something deeper, something that transcended this small suburban yard. Thomas stood still for a moment, watching the woman leave, his gaze shifting slowly to his loyal companion by his side. Max, ever vigilant, had not moved an inch since his quiet but powerful response. He knew his job, and his job wasn't just to protect his handler in moments of physical danger. It was also to offer the kind of unspoken reassurance that only a service dog could provide. Max had sensed the tension in the air, the unspoken threats that had loomed over them, and he had acted with the calm authority of one who knew his place in the world. He wasn't just a dog. He was a lifeline for Thomas, a constant presence that made the world feel safer and more manageable. As Thomas looked down at his dog, he couldn't help but feel a rush of gratitude and pride. The years of training, the hours of work, the countless moments of understanding between them, all of it had culminated in this one defining moment. Max wasn't just a protector. He was a partner, a friend, and a symbol of the strength that the two of them shared. The bond between them was not something that could be easily understood by others, especially not someone who had never walked in Thomas's shoes, never felt the weight of war and the wounds, both physical and emotional, that followed it. Max turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Thomas. It was a look that needed no words. Thomas smiled faintly, his heart swelling with a sense of connection that was as unshakable as the bond they shared. "You did good, buddy," Thomas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It was a simple phrase, but it carried the weight of years spent together, facing the challenges of both military life and civilian life. Max had always been there, through the good days, the bad days, the days when Thomas had wanted to give up. And now, Max had proven that he would always be there when needed most, with unwavering loyalty and courage. The emotional weight of the moment hit Thomas harder than he expected. He had always known that Max was more than just a dog. He had seen the strength in the dog's eyes, felt the steady presence beside him during moments of panic, anxiety, and uncertainty. But today, that strength had been tested in a way that Thomas never could have imagined. Max had been his shield, not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional realm as well. The service dog had been the calming force in the storm, the constant that had steadied Thomas when the world seemed to be spinning out of control. As Thomas stood there, reflecting on what had just transpired, he couldn't help but think back to the days when he first met Max. It had been after a particularly difficult deployment, one that had left him with scars both visible and invisible. He had been struggling to find his place in the world again, unsure of how to navigate the transition from combat to civilian life. It was then that he had been introduced to the idea of a service dog, a companion that could help him face the daily challenges of life outside the military. Max had been with him ever since, a constant reminder that no matter how dark the days got, he wasn't alone. The bond between a service dog and its handler is not just one of companionship, it is one of trust, of understanding that transcends words. Max didn't need to be told when Thomas was feeling anxious or when he was reliving a moment from his past that caused him pain. Max could sense it, and he would always be there, either standing quietly by his side or offering the comforting weight of his presence in the most subtle of ways. The bond was unspoken, but it was one of the strongest forces in Thomas's life. And now, in this moment, that bond had been tested and proven. Max had reacted to the confrontation with the woman not out of aggression, but out of a deep understanding of the situation. He had done what he was trained to do, but in a way that only a dog like Max could, calmly, confidently, and without hesitation. It was a reminder to Thomas of just how much this dog meant to him, and how much he owed to the years of training and companionship they had shared. As the woman walked away, her earlier anger replaced by an uncertainty that lingered in the air, Thomas knew that the story wasn't over. This had been a small battle, but it had been a defining moment in his life. He didn't need to explain his need for Max to anyone else anymore. The way Max had stood by him, calm and ready, had spoken louder than any words ever could. Max was more than just a service dog. He was a symbol of everything Thomas had fought for, everything he had endured, and everything he had yet to overcome. Together, they had faced a moment of conflict, and together, they had emerged victorious, not through force, but through loyalty, courage, and the power of their bond. As the day began to settle into evening, with the sun slowly sinking behind the trees, Thomas felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't just because the conflict was over, but because he knew, without a doubt, that Max would always be there by his side. In a world that often felt uncertain and hostile, that was a comfort unlike any other. As the woman walked away, her footsteps growing fainter with every step, Thomas remained standing in the yard, his gaze locked on Max, the German shepherd who had just proven once again that he was more than just a dog. He was a companion, a protector, and above all, a friend. But despite the tension having started to dissolve, Thomas knew the encounter wasn't quite over. It had only just begun to reveal the deeper layers of conflict that lay beneath the surface. For a long moment, the world seemed to pause. The wind rustled through the leaves, birds chirped in the distance, and Max remained by his side. As still and as composed as always, Thomas took a slow breath, his mind processing the events of the past few minutes. The woman had left, but her words still echoed in his mind. There had been something about her anger, something that hadn't been about the dog at all. She had been determined to make him leave, not because of any legal grounds, but because she had seen an opportunity to exert control, to push back against something she didn't understand. But it wasn't just that. The woman's behavior had also been rooted in something more insidious, a deep-seated belief that she could decide who belonged in the neighborhood and who didn't. It wasn't about Max. It was about power, about the unspoken hierarchy in communities where people often believe they can dictate the lives of others without consequence. And though the encounter had ended without any physical confrontation, Thomas knew it wasn't truly over. As he turned toward the door, his hand still on Max's harness, he noticed a movement from the corner of his eye. The woman, who had once seemed so resolute, was walking back toward him. At first, Thomas thought it might be another attempt to escalate the situation, but then he saw the change in her expression, a kind of reluctant hesitation. She stopped a few feet away, her shoulders slumped, and her eyes not meeting his. I want to apologize," she said quietly, her voice lacking its previous anger. The words were slow and deliberate, and Thomas could see that she wasn't quite sure how to continue. She seemed genuinely conflicted, as though her pride was waging a battle inside her. Thomas said nothing at first. He simply waited, sensing that there was more to come. The woman seemed to struggle with her emotions, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I didn't understand," she finally admitted. I've never been around dogs like him before. I thought you were just breaking the rules. I didn't realize how important he was to you." Thomas nodded, acknowledging her words but not quite letting the moment pass without understanding. "Max isn't just a dog," he said gently. "He's more than that. He's part of me, just like you are part of this community. I know you were just doing what you thought was right, but there's a lot more to it than rules." She looked at him then, really looked at him. The hardened edge in her expression had softened, replaced by a mixture of embarrassment and genuine realization. "I guess I didn't realize how much you rely on him, how much that bond means to you. I've never thought about it that way. I'm sorry." Max, sensing the change in atmosphere, took a slow step forward. His body language was calm but steady, his focus on the woman now, not with the same tension he had shown earlier, but with a quiet confidence that seemed to put her at ease. He wasn't just a service dog. He was the bridge between a veteran who had fought for his country and a neighbor who had been quick to judge, but was now learning to understand. The woman glanced down at Max, who stood at ease, his eyes not accusatory but simply alert, calm, and unthreatening. The apology that Thomas had received wasn't just for him. It was for Max too. It was a recognition that, in that moment, the woman had failed to see the true nature of their relationship, the depth of loyalty that existed between them. And now, as the reality of that bond settled in, she understood. "I'm sorry for raising my voice," she continued, her tone more subdued. "I was wrong, and I shouldn't have assumed so much. I've lived here for years, and I should have been more understanding. I don't want to cause any more problems." Thomas saw the sincerity in her eyes, and for the first time, he felt a shift, an unexpected resolution. It wasn't often that people came back to apologize, let alone acknowledge their missteps with such humility. The woman had come to see Max not just as a dog, but as a symbol of something larger, something that connected people beyond surface-level differences, beyond petty rules and misunderstandings. He smiled, a small but genuine gesture, and extended a hand. "I appreciate that," he said. "We all make mistakes, but we're all just trying to live our lives, each of us carrying our own battles. I'm glad we could talk." The woman hesitated for a moment. Then, almost nervously, she shook his hand. It wasn't the same firm handshake that might signify victory or power, but one of mutual understanding. A moment of quiet respect shared between two individuals who had seen things from different perspectives, but were now, however briefly, on the same page. With a final nod, she turned and walked back down the driveway, her steps slower this time, more measured. Thomas stood in the yard for a moment longer, watching her leave, feeling a sense of closure that he hadn't expected. As he looked down at Max, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride. This wasn't just about a confrontation. It was about understanding, about opening eyes and hearts, and about the power of loyalty and courage to shift perspectives. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the lawn, Thomas and Max stood there together, side by side, their bond as unbreakable as ever. The day had started with tension and conflict, but it ended with something far more powerful, an unexpected resolution, one that was based not on winning an argument, but on the simple strength of understanding and the courage to change.